So we're going to move on to our second piece of the morning. We're going to be doing a panel session led by Bonnie, who was nicely introduced this morning by Patrick. And she's going to be running a panel talking about device-agnostic surveys and overcoming the roadblocks. I think it's a really interesting topic. We're going to have on this panel this morning J.D. Deitch, who is also sitting near the front, Senior Vice President, Respondent Access and Engagement at Ipsos. And before I go on, actually, Bonnie is the Executive Vice President of Client Relations at Lightspeed. We're going to have Andy Drake. I think this is Andy. It says Andree. I'm pretty sure I know Andy. Director of Online and Mobile at Holland Partners. And Deborah Santos, who actually I haven't seen in years, so hi, Deborah. Good to see you again. VP of Sample Strategy and Standards at TNS, and Sima Vasa, Chief Evangelist Officer. I'd like to find out more what that means. And co-founder at Paradigm Sample. It's a whole new title. So on that note, if the folks on that panel can come up here, we can get things going. And if you're on any panels or any sessions as you go on, just try to go to the back of the room about 5 minutes before your session to get mic'd up. Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. Once again, I'd like to extend a really, really warm welcome. And thank you to our esteemed panelists in advance. Don really set the stage for us so beautifully, and I'm at a loss for words, which is rare for me, for those of you all who know me. Don't laugh too loud. But I think that that grid that Don put up just showing the survey, saying you guys don't do this anymore with the little check boxes and the little grid, strongly agree, and we're all laughing, really, that's the topic of this conversation. So my presentation's already disrupted, and I embrace that. So, plus Rob already introduced the panelists, so that gives us more time. We've got a great group together to really talk about a topic that is just so critical for all of us. And in the last SampleCon, I think every panel discussion talked about the importance of moving towards device-agnostic surveys so that we can be successful in getting the insights that the marketers need to run their businesses and to connect with the consumers. And we had a lot of questions. We all put the challenges forward. But in the end, we really didn't have any answers. We just knew that this was something that, was really critical, for all of us. So today we're going to take the challenge and really talk about how we drive, the adoption. And we've got our speakers today are just really, really passionate. They share my passion, and I'm sure all of your passion for the topic. They're the ones driving within their own organizations the adoption of device-agnostic surveys, whether people are taking surveys on PCs, laptops, phablets, tablets, smartphones, the Apple 6, the Apple 6 Plus, the whatever. The list of devices is just going to get, more and more complex. But we've got leaders in the industry helping us, to be the evangelists, and so we want to hear from them. I'm going to take a couple of minutes just to set the stage for us and give you a little bit of background for those who may need a little bit more of an introduction. And I'm going to turn it over to our panelists, but I just want to make a comment that another change that I embrace. One of the great things about SampleCon is that it's a really, really intimate setting. So we love this conference, and for those of us who are participating, one of the great things that we found is that there's just a ton of participation. So I'm standing up here under this chandelier that is very beautiful, and we're in this formal setting, and we have a lot of you here. I don't see anyone wearing jeans today. Last year, everybody wore jeans. Tomorrow, maybe we'll wear jeans. I don't know. But let's just remember that, this is here. We're all here together as an industry, and it's something that we want to, carry forward. So we expect, this is a great topic, and we just want a lot of participation. So I'm going to encourage that from our moderators, from our panelists. Some who are really shy, like JD. I'm concerned that we're going to get, that we have to draw enough information from him.
Glad I wore proper pants today.
Totally. All right, so I'm going to move on and just set the stage for you quickly. Okay. Oh, okay, the stats. 58% is a number that we've all heard. It's the number that was reported last year by Pew in January 2014. The number of the penetration of smartphones in January. Bigger now, but that's the number that we've got. 83% would be the U.S. smartphone penetration for the 18 to 29-year-olds. So we all know that people are taking, surveys on the devices. There's no question about that. 80%. That's the U.S. projected smartphone penetration in 2018. 70% or greater than 70%, we're looking at global numbers here. So that's the smartphone penetration for countries like UAE, South Korea, Saudi Arabia, Singapore, Canada. Adam, are you back there? Adam from Aspen Canadians. I know Canada's up there too in smartphone penetration. What? Okay, great. Around 60? Is that what you said? Yeah, okay. 150. Many of you may have seen this number thrown around, and what it represents is the number of times per day that people pick up their mobile devices. Well, I looked this up. I Googled it, Don. Because I thought people were going to say, okay, well, where the hell did that number come from? We all know it. We all talk about it. And so what I found out is that it was actually Nokia that put this number forward. It's a global number back in 2010. And then T-Mobile updated the number and said, actually, it's over 200 times globally, and that was in 2012. And then I read, well, actually, the number is probably higher now, and no one really knows what the number is, but it's high. But anyway, we know that people are using and engaging with their mobile devices all the time. October 7th, 2014. Does anybody know what that date represents?
Mobile page views exceeded desktop?
The what?
No, never mind.
Close.
Very close.
It's the day that GSMA announced the number of mobile devices actually exceeded the population globally. And the GSMA is, they represent about 800 mobile operators, probably everybody globally. So they're pretty well known, incredible. And then March 2017, this is another forecast. It's when they predict that mobile web will actually exceed that mobile web access will actually exceed non-mobile web access globally. So what does this all mean? I chose not to be wired up and to use this. I might regret that decision. But anyway, what does all of this mean? These are all stats, and I'm focusing on smartphones. We've got tablets out there. We know people are coming in on all of these devices. But what does it really mean for us? I just said it, right? People are engaging us, they're taking surveys, and they're all coming in on mobile devices. So we still have a lot of PC people out there, but certainly without question, we know that people are coming in. We see it on Lightspeed's panels, we see it across the industry. Anywhere from 30 to 50% of people are registering on the panels to take surveys using their mobile devices, whether it's a smartphone or a tablet. We see it when people are actually taking surveys that they're coming in and they're using their mobile devices. So I think, Don really talked about embracing the disruption or the change. And I've read from some of our colleagues in the industry where they see mobile as disruptive. And I think for us, it's not really, is it really disruptive to say, okay, now we can no longer have respondents taking 30-minute surveys with those monstrous grids? I don't think so. I think we've been getting to that point, for a long time. And we, JD, you referred to it as a tipping point, I think, in one of your blogs, that we're really at a tipping point in the industry. And that's such a drastic thing to say, but it's true, that we've really got to, to make some changes. So we found this picture that is really much more of a reflection of what we want to think about. So, so we should be excited, we should grab the opportunity, we should seize the moment. And without change, the risks are high. And I'm going to run through these because I think everybody in this room knows what they are. We're already seeing it. Lower response rates, higher dropout rates as people come into their mobile devices. Oh, could you guys hear me? I wasn't even talking.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Lower response rates, higher dropout rates that we're already seeing. So we know people are taking surveys on the smartphones, and they may take one and never come back, or they may just drop out right from the beginning. Non-representative sample. This is something that's very real. If we've got a beer study that we're fielding, and we're trying to reach 22-year-old males, we've got to have a survey that's rendering for them on their devices. So there's a risk of bad data, and ultimately the loss of respondents. And let's just remember that our respondents are people. So we don't have an infinite pool of people willing to take surveys and give us information. It's a finite pool, and we've got to really respect them. And Ben's going to be talking about privacy. And we've got to make sure that we're really engaging our greatest asset. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our esteemed panelists, and then it will ask for your participation. I'm going to start with just a question that I think we've all had. We put this notion of device agnostic surveys out there, and what does that mean? There's definitions that fly around in terms of, we don't have any standards yet in the industry, and among our clients. So we'll start, Deb, do you want to start off just by telling us how you and TNS would define device agnostic surveys? What goes into that definition?
Sure. I think it's really hard to come up with an exact definition of device agnostic because we know there are panelists out there that'll take surveys on mobile devices that are 30 minutes long. But at TNS, we've tried to set some general standards where survey length is around 12 to 15 minutes. But you got to keep in mind that if you take a survey on a PC that's 12 minutes, it may increase as you go to a smartphone or a tablet because of load time. So we've been kind of defining it as a 12-minute PC timing. Grids, we know respondents don't like grids, so we really want to try to keep them to a minimum, even if we're doing it online. But we got to think about scrolling. We have to think about what a respondent has to go through to read a grid. So again, we're trying to keep that to a minimum of one, and mainly what you can see on your screen. And then the third item, I think, is open ends. I'm not the best texter. It takes me quite a while, so I think about it as a respondent. If you're asking a person to answer a rather lengthy question on an open end, that could take them quite a bit of time and may frustrate them. So like I said, it's hard. My best thought is, take that survey on a mobile device yourself. I try to encourage clients to do that as well so they can really see the experience.
That's great. Thanks, Deb. So who else wants to jump in? Seema, how do you guys define it?
So I think clients don't like this answer, but it really depends. But from the way that we think about it is looking at a survey design for the lowest common denominator. And so imagine kind of always on a smartphone responding to surveys, and to your point, try the survey yourself. Are you actually going to respond to that survey? We actually keep it a little bit lower in terms of minutes. We keep it to 5 to 7 minutes. And the question types, we're willing to try different questions, but we definitely stay away from the long, complicated grids and such as well, and keep open ends to a minimum as well.
Andy?
Yeah, because I don't think there is one rule here. I mean, I think
right.
if you think about, if it's 5 minutes or it's 10 minutes, if it was a conversation, you could capture enormous amounts of information in 5 minutes. So I think this hard and fast rules around it aren't really the appropriate angle to come at it from. I think it's a design issue. I mean, every time I think about this, I mean, even the concept of talking about the word survey, I think increasingly, going back to one of Don's points, is this transformational thing is about serving content. So for me, it's time is one. It is one of the attributes,
Yeah.
but it's what think about what you're going to design and serve up to people, having got 5 minutes of their time. So, the words, the brevity of it, So I actually think sometimes less questions. So I think the design piece for me is what we're trying to work on, and that's a challenge because people typically in this industry want to ask lots of questions.
And the time thing really is just something to anchor a client in,
Yeah.
right? Because if you leave it open, we end up with 15, 16, 17 questions, which are ridiculous. So we always start with the time element, and then
Yeah,
obviously
yeah.
it's the design. And I agree, it definitely has to be conversational,
Yeah.
because you're going to lose them if it's not conversational.
Wow, Seema, 16 to 17 questions, that sounds really short.
I know. It's a long time, though. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
JD, what's your point of view
You know,
for those?
the technical aspects, I mean, they've all sort of covered the length issues, the formatting issues, and those sorts of things. I mean, the really tricky part about device agnostic studies, when most of us would see them, is the fact that there's already been a contract signed, and there's already probably a questionnaire that's been developed. And so you are then sat in front of the client with the clock ticking, and probably very little negotiating space to actually do things that you know are to the benefit of the research. That's the tricky part.
So I think what we're hearing is just that there's a lot of ways to define device agnostic. We don't have any set way, but LOI certainly plays into it. Survey design, the way the survey renders would also be critical. And then I think it's the challenges that we have, with our clients. And Stephanie, you're going to be pulled into this conversation very shortly. So that begs the next question: is whose responsibility is it to have device agnostic surveys and to engage the respondents? Is it ours as a sample industry, as full service market researches? Is it the MR companies? Is it the end client? How do we, who is responsible so that we can get this done? Go ahead, JD.
It's, I think you have to ask yourself, what's the nature of the problem we're facing? 'Cause I don't actually believe that the nature of the problem that we're facing is it's a research problem. I think it's a business problem, first and foremost. You can look at new surveys as being an opportunity where you're sort of starting from scratch. You have an opportunity to educate. More and more, what you find is that if our clients are sort of less research oriented, then there's another bar to hurdle. And occasionally now our client service people even have less of a research background too. So I think it's a real challenge to get that education started. But that just assumes new projects as well. If we look at the 800-pound gorilla in the room, it's tracking studies and norm studies that have been on autopilot for a number of years right now, where the problem is really, the business problem that we have is that most of those studies probably need to shrink, and since revenue is a function of survey size, then that starts to get a lot of people who are not researchers really anxious. I mean, it's fundamentally a top-line problem. And yet, we also look at it, I mean, if you take Clay Christensen's implications sort of all the way, one of my favorite quotes of his is, we tend to look at the problem as if it's a marginal cost sort of thing, where if we can just optimize, then we'll be in decent shape. I think there are people in this room, I'm one of them, who believes that we're actually facing a full cost problem. And that is that if we don't solve our engagement problem, particularly with younger audiences, then somewhere next, I think sort of 12 to 18 months, it falls off a cliff. And we have real feasibility problems running existing trackers. And then for those of you who've had to go through high-stakes Russian roulette game of changing trackers when it falls off a cliff. I mean, that's the last, that's got to be the last choice in terms of how we manage those things.
I think with a lot of our trackers, we took them from the offline and just moved them online.
Sure.
And at this point in time, we have a really good opportunity to sit back and look at that and not let that happen with device agnostic surveys. Because I agree with JD completely that if we don't do something, we're not going to have the respondents to answer surveys, and therefore the tracker's not going to go anyways. But it is a challenge for internal business as well, because it's not only that we are talking to our external clients about device agnostic, we also have to sell internally to our own salespeople that, hey, you have to make this change as well, and you have to be in front of those clients talking to them about what we're seeing from a respondent access point of view.
Yeah.
And to-
So, Deb,
To
Deb,
follow
could
that
you?
even further, I
Right.
mean, if you think about it, if we're going to then end up generally taking something away from them, then the question is, so how do I get to know this other part that's meaningful for me? And so it is almost a boil the ocean type of thing that we need to do, which is not just shrink what we're doing right now, but then replace it, find other means, packaging with other data or any of these sorts of things, so that we can continue to answer the questions.
But who's,
But
so
do so-
JD, whose responsibility do you think it is?
It's got to be a shared discussion between our client people and our clients.
I totally agree. I think it's definitely a shared problem in our industry. You know, when I started thinking about it, I mean, ultimately, the people on the panels really want to optimize the respondent engagement. But it then comes down to a business issue, because if you're going to push back and say no to long surveys, then you're kind of the only man out, and everybody else is filling those studies.
I was on a call with an RFQ today for a 45-minute
Yeah.
tracker.
Yeah.
I mean,
But I think
Does anybody here not know that pain?
but I think there's an interesting bit, because I think it's a really good question. I think the core of it to me is, if we want to remain relevant, and I'm sort of thinking of it, who do we want to remain relevant to? I think we need to remain relevant to consumers, or AKA respondents, and we need to stay relevant to our clients. So if they're the two big groups, and to me that's the sort of, you get that bit right, and I think we'd be, doing good work. So if that notion is right, then recognising everything you've said about the commercial realities and big business out there, then surely we've got to own that. The relationship with our clients, we've got to drive that and impress upon them that it's worth doing. Because I don't think it is their responsibility, and I don't think they'll typically understand it. It's not for them to call the shots,
So we have Stephanie from Clorox here.
We just want the real facts. I think that's through education.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, it's a long discussion in a lot of those. I mean, and it's what I like to call an adult discussion, right? I mean, we can't sort of pretend that people are not on their smartphones, or that 18 to 24-year-olds are still joining the panel in droves. And again, the tricky part on our side ends up being, you really have to have the right kind of relationship, because especially in existing studies, if you go and advocate the redesign, then you've really got to come in with a highly strategic point of view on it, really understand the client, because if you do it sort of half-heartedly, or you don't really resonate, then you find the whole project being put up for bid again. And then, the playing field is open, and we get back to Christensen's issue of what kind of problem are we facing, right? I mean, I would rather go through the hard work and continue to be able to run the study at a more sustainable level, maybe with a different margin, than just to simply lose the business, right?
And are you guys actually finding too, this is something else that we've been pondering, is just that as the millennial and Gen Ys are coming into purchase power, and then I'm a CPG company, but one of my products has high appeal to African American and Hispanic men who are not going to be on panels and they're not going to be taking online tests, but potentially that segment of consumers I could reach via mobile. And have you thought
the
about...
demographics are a lot better on mobile. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, any of the sort of demographics associated with minorities or what we used to call the digital divide, all those, I mean, the numbers on Hispanics, young people, moms with babies, are all much better on mobile devices. And those people are out there and they're taking surveys, right? I mean, you don't necessarily need custom panels. I think there are places probably where we're seeing them in like river sample types of environments where they're willing to participate. And maybe they're not so interested in the incentive that I have to offer them for my panel, but because they're coming through an incentivized ad network, they're getting incentives that are relevant to them.
Yeah.
And you know, the sort of value proposition for them is there if we've got something decent to offer them in terms of a survey.
But that's the key, isn't it, really, is the value proposition to them.
Yeah. I think that's the ray of hope, though, because you can't get a lot of those audiences online, clients are willing to experiment with mobile and willing to try it and get those people engaged. And we've seen really good luck with that, where there's low incidence studies and people have said, how do you get these people? And we can try mobile if you're interested, and we've been successful. But you know, it's a lot of conversation, it's a lot of reasons why you can't do it online and why this solution might work. So there is a ray of hope there in terms of the audiences that are tougher to get to.
Yeah, we found in some countries globally that it's mobile is the only way to go.
Yeah.
That PC, the industry has kind of skipped over PC and went directly to mobile. But I think the most important thing of all for a client is to think about when you're designing your survey to have it device agnostic, because you want the respondent to have the ability to take the survey on whatever device they want to take it on.
I can tell you that the business questions that we're trying to solve, though, sometimes are pretty complex, and we do need the explanation. So that's where there's probably going to continue to be that tension over what we want to ask and why we want to ask it and how we need to do that. And then just looking for guidance of this can't be device agnostic, because the amount of time that we need for the respondent to get to the answer that we're looking for might be too taxing on a mobile device. And then what are those ramifications?
Right, because you will lose respondents if you don't design it that way. And then you say to the person, I only want you to take this survey on PCs. And if you think about it, you know, the younger population just really isn't on PCs as much as the older people.
They're there, we can't just achieve the same level of feasibility, right? I mean,
Right.
that's it. You know, I think one of the interesting things, though, and you're starting to see it. It's my belief that we're starting to seed ground to, you know, sort of big data applications, more marketing reports. You know, there's a lot of different data sources that are out there now, in addition to the active interrogation of a consumer. And I think we're really seeing now that people are willing to try to put together data from different sources to answer the question, right? There are things that they know they can get at in a survey environment, but then they're looking for other ways of kind of putting that data together. And you see that theme in the industry right now, even to the point where people talk about piecing together the story and telling that story in terms of mixing data sources.
But I think what's quite interesting about, you know, your 45-minute RFP routine, and we all face it, we all deal with it, and Stephanie's point about still having to answer lots of complex questions. I think one of the things that strikes me, and we've been experimenting a bit with this, is that, you know, if you actually go back to what the questions that need to be answered are, you know, the business questions, we now have assets that we can answer them in different ways. I mean, historically, one of the mantras has been, you know, you get one stab at this group of people, you only get one opportunity to talk to them. Well, you know, I think a specific example I can think of is we do a lot of work in, you know, brand and comms research, and we'll bury a question about, you know, did you see the billboard advertising on the underground in minute 28 of the survey? Well, surprise, surprise, we don't get an awful lot of it. So what we started to do is sort of go, well, don't ask it there, but maybe we get 100 people to use their mobile phones to spend a week showing us what they are seeing on the underground. So this sort of rethink of how we answer some of the questions. I mean, it's design, but it's going back to what we're actually trying to do with this. So now, the flip side of the mobility thing to me is it offers loads of things we can do that we couldn't do before. But to do that, we've got to have a real serious think about how we, what we're setting out to answer.
So I think we are seeing that, it's loud and clear, right? There's a collaboration between all of the parties, those of us who sample, full service, to, provide the guidance to people like Stephanie and our ultimate end clients. It's how do we develop new products? How do we migrate existing trackers? We need the data. In many cases, people are compensated. You've got all of these, the metrics, whether, the list goes on. So how do we preserve, some of our legacy tracking and advertising testing? How do, what new products? There's great opportunity, I think, which is really the easier and the exciting part, is that there's lots of cool things that we can do as people do come in, and Don talked about that. I'm going to hand it over because I think we've got a lot of great participation going. But there's all of that opportunity, and it's definitely a collaboration. But I think we all have responsibility, and I think that's what we're hearing.
There were some questions. I think people had some hands raised. There were some people who had some hands raised.
Well, I think, yeah, so I think we're going to, this is a great discussion, and we're already getting audience participation, which is fabulous. So, Don, I promised I was going to turn it to you.
Great. I have two questions for the panel. This one? Two questions. The first one is, are your clients willing to experiment with taking a 15-minute survey and breaking it down into 3 5-minute surveys or 5 3-minute surveys? The reason I ask is because at YouTube, we figured out that if you took a 25-minute video and broke it down into 5-minute segments, the completion rates or the participation shot up like 10x. So are your clients willing to do that, to try?
Deb, didn't you do a Casro paper on that? Was that Frank? Yeah.
Frank did one. We have been experimenting with what we call data chunking or data stitching, where you take the survey and divide it up exactly how you've described. It's worked well in some cases. In some, we need to do further research on it. And Frank Kelly, the gentleman that's sitting a couple rows back, he was actually the author of the paper, and he can probably explain it a little bit better than I can, Frank.
I think there's some willingness, though. I think surely. I mean, the people, I do believe that.
Frank, is there anything you want to add?
Not really. It's
We can all go home now.
You presented like 3 times on this topic.
it is a concept with a lot of promise. There's a lot of ways to do it. The bottom line is that not everybody needs to ask every question. When you go through the diligence of taking a 20-minute survey and breaking it up into pieces, and you realize not everybody needs to be asked all the questions, first of all, and not all the questions need to be asked. And when you start looking through the redundancies of the questions and so forth, you almost get back to what you need in the first place. But certainly, we just need to challenge ourselves that do we need every question? Do we need 1,000 completes on every question? Do you really need to cross every question with every question? And when you find out, in most types of surveys, that's probably not the case. So there is the opportunity to do that. But it does require a lot of thinking up front before you design the survey. You have to really decide which questions can I get by with only 500 responses and not be able to cross with these other questions. You have to think about grouping the questions in the right way. So it puts a lot more analytical thought into the survey design process. And not everybody that's designing surveys is going through that rigor. So certainly, it's one solution that it worked for a lot of types of surveys, I think. And there are even fancier approaches doing, data fusion and so forth that can also have some promise for certain types of of surveys, particularly things like media effectiveness and so forth, where there's a very standardized set of questions that you ask. So I'd say that it's one approach, but I think the focus should be on getting the surveys short in the first place.
Was Don had a second question, didn't he? Was there a...
Yeah, the second question is, perhaps you already do this, I don't know. Interactive surveys. So if you ask question 1 and they answer yes, then you ask question why. If they answer no, you give them a different second question,
Yes.
right? So there should never be a survey where it's not a complete, because if you design the survey right, you can learn information no matter what their answer is, ask them a different question and you get it. So do you design them that way?
Yes. I think we adapt to, at least, we adapt to the responses to then feed into the next set of questions. So, optimizing the time and the real estate of that survey.
I think to a point, though, I think you raise a really, really good, it's a really pertinent question, because I think that interactivity could be a whole lot better.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think it goes back to one of the things you talked about, which was that, capturing intent and this idea of not capturing data that might not seem meaningful at the time, but becomes so.
Later.
Thanks, Don. David?
Hi, David from Lightspeed again. Just an observation, and I'm thinking back to the ARF's Foundation of Quality initiative. So my analogy is this. We're, I think, as we're all discussing, at a bit of a tipping point as it relates to the quality of respondents, the ability to get certain demographics to answer survey questions online, not on mobile, the reason that we're having this panel today. I really believe that we have an educational issue, and Stephanie, I think, highlighted some of the questions that she has. And, wouldn't it be great if we could get, SMR, CASRO, ARF, SampleCon to agree on a set of educational initiatives so we're all talking from the same hymn book? Because right now you have the full service companies, the sample companies, the consultants, and God knows who else talking to end clients about the challenges we have with getting certain people to take certain types of surveys. But we're all delivering that message in a very different way. The message probably is self-serving, right? I mean, let's face it, it is. Wouldn't it be great if we could all come together as an industry and just use the model of Foundations of Quality to deliver that message to the industry as a whole? And I think because we have such strong associations within our business, SMR, ARF, CASRO, just to name 3, let's get them all together and let's get a steering committee together from, the group sitting here and others, and really build a strong educational platform to which communication will occur to the end client so that they really understand the issues that we're facing, so that we can change faster and at the end be able to get them what they're looking for, which is great consumer insights, because consumers are willing to share the information if they're being asked questions in a time and place of where they want to share it and how they want to share it.
I think it's a really,
Amen.
I think
Thank
it's
you,
a really
David.
interesting idea. The only thing that I would add, though, is how long did
I
it
told
take
you he was shy.
FOQ? How long did it take FOQ to finish?
Let's speed it up, JD.
So I think we just had...
Not me.
I want to say something. I think we just had a fantastic call to action. So thank you, David. And just for those of you who, we're going to be talking about this a little bit when we break out into our collaboration labs, but one of the missions of SampleCon is to be able to provide a forum for this type of conversation, and then to work very closely with our associations, CASRO, SMR, ARF, to help us move forward, and MRIA as well in Canada. So I think, we're going to be, I think that's one of the things as we continue to move forward, that we try to come together as a group and do exactly what you said, David. So I don't know how everybody else feels. I see nods. I see a question in the back. Where?
Hi, it's Adam.
Oh,
Furman.
Adam.
I'm CEO of a company called Delvini in Canada. So I've been a digital entrepreneur for about 20 years. And about 10 years ago, I started as part of our innovation stuff testing data collection and how it was going to change, and it ended up building a business called Asking Canadians. And as I sit and listen, I don't hear that sense of urgency. So being someone who's been in digital for 20 years, the discussion of the excuse the term, complacency amongst the research community, I was kind of hoping, I hear this in Canada, and I open my mouth to the research community there and tell them to kind of, take your head out of the sand. I'm watching Don talk from Google. The research community is sort of sitting on the beach still, sort of enjoying the weather, and there's a tsunami coming.
Yeah.
And it's coming quick. I'm part of the tsunami. Rob's company is part of the tsunami. Google is the tsunami. And I don't think we realize how much this change has to happen. JD, Ipsos is probably one of the worst culprits in not changing. But the reason it is, and I understand that's your role, but it's costing us money.
If you've read my blog post, you'll understand that I have a different point of view that I think that might.
In Canada, when 30% of our panelists fill out surveys on a mobile device, and I love the device appropriateness.
Yeah.
It's no longer sample companies as vendors. We're partners because we're all part of this. We're all running businesses in this. So my question for you is, are you prepared, the companies and the research firms, prepared to create a real sense of urgency? Or will you be comfortable when companies like ours tell you a survey comes in, it won't go, it isn't mobile friendly, it isn't device agnostic, that we have to charge you more for those surveys? Which direction do you want to go? Because we're ready to go. I'm kind of fed up as the owner of the business saying, why are we losing money because of the complacency in the industry? Over to you.
Well, we have to let JD
I sort of
respond to
took
that,
I sort of took the first arrow on that one. So I don't think I've been shy about shouting from the top of the mountain. There's been a couple of pieces that I've done recently about really what I see is a crisis happening. In defense of my company, it's a large and complicated company, right?
Yep.
And but I think the issue, again, I'll go back to what I said initially, which is, the issue ends up not being, it's not a research problem, it's a business problem. And when you look at again, the 800-pound gorilla, it is those tracking studies and the stuff that's been around a long time. I mean, I don't know what anybody else's business looks like, but there's a huge chunk of our business that is, either tracking studies or norm study work. I mean, all of our advertising work is based on norms. It's not something that changes quickly. I will agree, definitely, that I see a lot less. I don't know that I would call it a lack of urgency. I would call it rather just an uncertainty about the implications of it, right? Because when you think about what would happen to change those studies, then there are business changes that need to happen as well. And in a large, complicated organization, it's a really difficult pill to swallow. I mean, in a way, it's one of the reasons why the company needs to react fairly quickly. It's for us, we're getting ready to really start to make some big waves, beginning internally. And very seriously, we've just finished our own pretty intensive research on research, length of interview, question types, all the rest of that stuff. Nancy is actually in the audience today who ran that for us. We have a point of view, and it's our obligation to make sure that the business units, the client service people internally, understand that we simply cannot continue to do the work in the same fashion.
And I think, JD, in all fairness, as your moderator, I think this is
You're gonna cut
something
me off
that
now.
no, I think that this is something Ipsos is not alone, right?
No,
I think
no.
we're all trying.
Yeah.
I think there is a sense of urgency. I think we're all trying to put that out there now. I mean, I know I can speak for our organization, at Lightspeed. But we do see the sense of urgency, and we know it's not just about you've got to pay more money if your survey doesn't render properly or if it's longer. You're not going to get the respondents, and you're not going to get the young males, and you're not going to get the Hispanics, in those traditional trackers.
And put your business at, really put
Right.
your business at risk, because it's a
Absolutely.
tragedy of the commons type
Yeah.
of thing right now. We are overfishing
Yeah.
the pond.
But I think coming back to the question, I think is wholly valid. I don't think it's right. I'm not going to be specific about any one company because I don't think that's right. But I think as an industry, we have been incredibly complacent about it.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, I think
But not
think
now,
it's
Andy.
no, but I think it's valid
We
to be
can't-
challenged in the way we were on that question, because I think we really do have to think differently. We have to act differently. I think JD's point, though, is right, is that it is, particularly large-scale companies, it's not straightforward. I think there is an understanding of the sense of urgency. Executing that is, you have to win a lot of hearts and minds, and I think you have to have a lot of proof. I think this is one of the things that is the challenge. But I think we have, it's not an industry historically that's been blessed by being great in technology. So there's immediately one of the barriers to really grasping this. And secondly, frankly, it's also been a growth industry. But now it is the tsunami. It's all coming together. The market is now global growth has slowed down. The rate of growth is technology becomes a much bigger piece in the debate. And I think it's how you deal with it. But I think complacency is the right word.
I agree with that, actually. I mean, every conference I go to, we say for 5 years, 6 years, we're at the tipping point. Social mobile, tipping point. We started mobile 6 years ago, and we're still waiting for it. 6 years ago, people would meet with us and say, okay, so what do you have for mobile? Great, I have it in my file cabinet. If a client asks me, I have an answer. We are moving forward. It's incremental. Now we're starting to get into other departments within the agency side and getting more conversations outside of innovation, but really client service. But I agree. I don't think we're moving fast enough. And
I would agree.
Yeah.
Don't mistake
Okay.
my point of view. I just think that what we see is that clients are starting to get it because response rates are
Yes.
falling, and they're not getting we have the sample sizes are growing, the surveys are getting more complex.
Those are the
People
proof
are very
points, yeah.
used to
Right.
online,
Yeah.
so the requirements are just crazy.
Yes.
And then it's like, wait a minute, you could do this last year. Why can't you fill this for me now?
Yeah.
Right.
And so I think that message, it's not the way that we would like to see it, but that's the message now.
I
It's
think
people
we're
are
at acceptance at this point
People are
versus denying
starting
it.
to see
Yeah.
it, at least starting.
Yeah.
I mean, do we want to talk about just the education? Because I think that's something that a lot of you are participating in. We've talked about, having to educate not just our, the industry at large and our clients, but also internally, the salespeople and the people who are working with people like Stephanie. Do you want to just talk about that? Maybe Deb, comment on what TNS is doing?
Well, we've done research on research and, created white papers, and we are actually educating all of our client services team. We're also partnering with some clients, which is really a great opportunity to help convince clients. Again, JD mentioned this earlier, a lot of this moving to mobile has an impact on revenue. We all have salespeople, and would they rather sell a $100,000 project that encompasses all devices or just PC devices, or would they rather sell a $50,000 device agnostic? So again, it's us, I feel in part it's our responsibility to convince our internal client services team that data quality is suffering and that they are going to have business that's jeopardized moving forward if they don't move to these device agnostic surveys.
I think it's even more than the client service people, though. I think it's really a question of having the organization oriented around it, right? I mean, we can't, for the most part, I mean, if I'm an operations guy these days, for the most part, by the time the job's commissioned, the war's over, right?
The war is
I
over,
mean, the
right.
battles are ugly, even when you try to put oversight into place on top of that, which is part of what we've done. But we're talking about, at a company like Ipsos, we're talking about from Didier on down, having agreement that this is the way that we need to roll. It is, I mean, that is with we finished our research on research now. We've got sort of our proof points, which is a combination of the understanding of what we need to do, the implications of what happens if we don't. And you know, the next step is really for us, and it'll happen soon, is sitting down with the global business leaders and saying, these are the things that we need to do, or the global research community, and you know, Ipsos, each of its business units has a chief research officer, or somebody who's sort of the voice of research there. It's making sure that you know the terrain, you know the battlefield before the war even starts, right? So that you can get people committed to it, that there are metrics behind it. I mean, it's all of those things.
What's worked?
Yeah.
Okay, terrific. I was just, we will in one minute. I just want to ask one question, and then we're going to turn it over to audience participation, because it's great that we've got, you know, a lot of you engaged. But just honing in on that point for 1 second, what has worked? I mean, you know, you've mentioned that, you know, some clients are coming on board. What's worked that we could take away as
I'll tell you one
as an
thing that's really
example?
worked very well for us is the speed.
Is what?
Speed.
Speed.
Right? When I can take a 10-minute study,
Yeah.
chuck it in the router, get mobile sample, because I mean, you know, the number that I was quoting to was 30 to 50% of our new recruits. Right? You get people coming in, they're ready to take a survey right away. Doesn't matter what device it is. And right now, studies like that are just vacuuming up vast amounts of feasibility that are otherwise lost because they're not ready. And so people see that and they're like, wow, I can get my study quick. I can, and it makes perfect sense. And I got young people participating. And
Seema, do you want to add to that?
Well, to answer the question, what's working in terms of educating the industry or clients has been client-anchored innovation. So if this client, we're working with Marriott right now on consumer engagements in 5 countries to understand a new product concept. To be able to share the results with other clients in the industry, best practices, that's proven to be highly valuable.
Yeah.
And there's credibility behind it, and they paid for it. It's not like we're doing research on research. There are client needs and clients willing to take that risk. And you know, over the last several years, we have a lot of case studies like that where people can see that things work, there's value in it. We did a consumer engagement study for a large CPG company, early buyer study, and we delivered results 6 months ahead of the traditional results. They're still doing the traditional buyer study, but they just had early reads to it, so it wasn't threatening. Right. So it's just how to help.
Experience talks,
It
right?
does.
Once
It really
I
does.
totally agree.
Yeah.
I think it's sort of the question about overcoming, you know, educating and overcoming inertia. What we found quite interesting this year, what we've started to do is serve up different types of content to people who are on our panels. And what's unequivocal is they sort of, so we do stuff like now, we'll go to their mobile device and we'll get them to do overnight stuff on adverts. Yep. And the very same people who are doing the 25-minute survey the day before are wowing about getting involved in this type of content. That they're going, this is really enjoyable. And it's night and day between that type of work and the traditional online stuff. Yeah. Now, I'm not saying everything moves to that, but we have to learn those lessons. We have to say that, so that works, and that the other benefit of it working is you can then start to move people internally, because they go, oh, right, so people are enjoying doing this stuff, and we're generating new insights for our clients. So I think that's where the body of evidence.
So as we add to the types of work that we do, taking advantage of of mobile and the people coming in on devices, then that's probably how we're going to move the needle. For the legacy work, because I think that's the challenge that we're all facing. Yeah. And eventually we're not going to be able to sustain that type of work if we just keep going. Okay, so we're going to turn it over to all of you. So I know there's some questions. Yes.
Hi, Ethan from User Testing. I got to ask this question because I am from User Testing. You mentioned kind of at the beginning of the discussion what you believed were the pain points of participants and kind of what you think the best ways to solve those pain points are. What kind of usability testing have you done to reach those conclusions?
Me? Or everybody?
Anybody?
Are you saying what are the pain point, what kind of research have we done to identify the pain points?
Usability testing, I think, was the question, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, has there been any usability testing to back up that research that those pain points are the correct pain points on mobile, and that the solutions that you've proposed solve those pain points?
I mean, I wouldn't say we've officially done that research by itself, but we've done real studies where we've seen things work better versus things that don't work as well. We're constantly trying different methods to understand what works and what doesn't work. But we're a small organization, so we haven't spent a lot of stuff that's not client funded.
We've done some research on research, and it's mainly been focused on the data quality differences that you get based on what device. We did a project where we looked at a survey across PC, smartphones, and tablets to see if you got different results. And what was evident in a lot of the research was that on people that came in on mobile devices as well as tablets, that their data degraded as they got longer into the survey, or if you asked more complicated questions at the end of the surveys, or if you put those grids.
Go, Rob.
You can probably turn my mic on. Actually, at Vision Critical, that's the company I'm with. I didn't introduce myself earlier. We actually spent a lot of time on exactly what you're asking, usability testing. Of course, we're always looking at data quality, how it affects the results, but every single question type, and I actually have one of our senior developer people here, we test all question types in an interactive fashion to see what the level of enjoyment is from panelists or from respondents who are coming through the exchange. And there's a lot of interesting results that come out of it. One that we found is that if you make the surveys more usable, people actually do longer surveys, contrary to some of what's been set up here. Psychologically, they actually think the surveys are shorter if the survey is actually more engaging. And this goes actually back almost 5 or 6 years ago at Vision Critical, where we did a lot of tests on what the effect was. And you can actually do surveys that are longer. It's a bit of a popular myth that you have to do only 5-minute surveys on a non-desktop environment. Whereas we found actually the tipping point, and that's a popular word this morning, is around 12 minutes. And then the data does start degrading. But again, it is enormously important, the usability and the actual customer experience as they're coming into it, and building customer communities, which is what Vision Critical is mostly focused on, in addition to using an extensive amount of sample from a lot of companies around this room, is ensuring that they have that level of engagement. And we fund that because clients won't pay for that data or that research. But if you want to get them to be device agnostic, you have to make it completely usable. There's nothing worse than getting a survey that looks exactly like a desktop survey on a mobile phone and then trying to fill it out and pinching and expanding and clicking on very little buttons. It's extremely frustrating. There's a question over here. Want to add into that? Yeah. I have my own microphone, so somebody has to bring you a microphone. I'm permanently mic'd all day.
Hi, I'm Andre with Protege MR, and I'm fairly new to this industry, but I want to share a story I heard down the elevator at work. A father was complaining to his colleagues about how frustrating his experience was with his daughter having a cell phone, because she texted him and expected an answer right away. The language she used was almost ineligible to him, and he doesn't check his phone 150 times a day, and so he had a big sort of friction point with his daughter. But that's just illustrating how I think the younger audience is using mobile. So what I wanted to hear is, or find out from the panel and some of the people here in the audience, is whether it just sounds to me like we're trying to take PC and figure out how to make it work for mobile. So the whole concept of a device agnostic survey doesn't make sense to me. I think it seems like we have to create new surveys or new concepts for mobile. So, for example, SMS. Can we run a survey on an SMS basis? So that's just my general thought.
I totally agree. I think it is. I think there's a session coming up, but we're dealing with something we're having to deal with at the moment, which is we do have to deal with how we get surveys on devices. But the bigger question is, I think, is what are we not using mobile for that we can be? Mm-hmm. Use it for its true capability.
In effect, we're still using print surveys on telephones.
Yeah. But we're beginning to move into that. I mean, it isn't the purpose
we
of this
never
bit.
changed when we went online.
I think the other thing that you have to consider on this is let's just put mobile aside for a minute, and if you still take surveys on PCs, the way we take surveys on PCs has changed dramatically over the past 2 and 3 years. When we moved from the offline world to the online world, we just transitioned a lot of those 60-minute surveys. And if we weren't in the mobile world right now, we'd still have to be doing something for those online PC surveys, because thinking the way we've been doing it in the past is working is wrong.
It's like how people used to sit in front of the radio and listen. Mm-hmm. People used to sit in front of the PC for like hours and just read the brochures that were online, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that was the way websites were, and they did 60-minute surveys.
And that gets back to the sense of urgency, right? So, I mean, we can't just sit back. It's not just about mobile. It's if we think, I mean, we have clients who think, okay, fine, our survey's got to be 30 minutes, so we're just not going to include anybody who's got a smartphone.
Well,
so this is PC only.
Yeah, the interesting bit about your question.
And seriously, right?
Yeah, there's an additional point I think about that question, which is even this, we chuck out these words, we go mobile. I think the really interesting bit is it's not even about the hardware, it's about the way people live, it's the way they consume. It's the way they consume media, and it's the way they go shopping, and it's the way they make choices. So this thing about, we get stuck in this, it's about mobile devices, or it's PCs, or it's, desktops, or whatever. It's not. It's about recognizing that people have radically changed. Behaviors totally changed. And this stuff is just the enabler. And when we realize that, then we've got to deal with, agnostic.
What's interesting is that I think we see better adoption of those newer methods with people who don't have the market research background.
Yeah,
right?
agreed.
Because they sort of look at it and they say, well, why would I ever want to do it that way? That's really cool.
Totally agree.
That's a great point,
absolutely.
JD.
Yes.
Right.
It's
Absolutely.
very true.
Yeah.
Even in a client space.
Which is where you come from, isn't it? I mean, that's you're sort of going, well, this is odd. This is a...
Yep.
Yep. Mendy, did you?
I'm going to dive in.
Oh,
and then I'll pass to Mindy.
Okay, sorry, I can't. I'm like,
So Patrick from...
I'm seeing chandeliers up here.
From Federated, the big question I have is, basically to the sample suppliers in the room, is are we seeing a transition of supplying to surveys where the cost of the interview is increasing because of lack of mobile friendliness or some design issues? Are we actually seeing that change? Because a number of years we all talked about it, and we still said, yes, we'll take the CPI you gave us for the PC and adopt it for
Well, that Adam's telling us he's going to charge more.
So I'm curious about that. And two, it sounds like these 800-pound gorilla tracking projects are holding us all back. I mean, they're probably funding a lot of companies, but they're holding us back. And the real question I have is, how long do the companies have until those go away? Because we saw customer satisfaction trackers completely disrupted by Medallia and Friends over the past 5 years. How much longer do norms and brand tracking get to sit in custom research houses before they're disrupted by technology firms?
You have to ask that guy right over there.
Well, I mean, that's... So the question is, are we being held back by this, cash cow called tracking?
Yeah.
Because and if we got rid of tracking, could we actually transform the industry?
And you're being disruptive.
So I can tell you what our suppliers are saying to us about long surveys, right? And some of them are not in the room today, in part because they don't want to confront this discussion, I don't think. But we certainly know that retention is a problem, right? What we found it way through, but sure, it's holding us back. There's no doubt about it.
And Patrick, because you've mentioned this before about the customer sat piece. Yes. And I sort of go, I totally agree with you. I think somebody you know, you could come in and pull the rug under with one, I think with a caveat, which is that I do think now, danger, we look at all the sort of the limitations of what we're not currently very good at. If we actually really embrace what mobile can do, my take is if you chuck the word tracker in the bin and said, what are the business questions you're trying to answer, I do believe that brands are going to continue to want to measure things. I mean, the corporate world wants the metrics. That's not going to go away, but I think you can reduce the number. There's loads of duplication. So, and often we're asking the right question at the wrong time. So there's a fundamental piece for me about saying that won't go away, but it could be streamlined, it could be cleverer, shorter. But then use these other assets that we've got to answer more meaningful insights. You know, so if you really grasp mobility, then there's lots of things it can answer that will never be answered in a traditional way. So it's not just, I don't think it's even just chunking. I think it goes beyond that. I think it's more radical than that to get to where you want to get. Whoever grabs that bit will take a lot of that tracker business.
When I was in the .com world, one of the things that we did, we had people surfing through a proxy at the start of online shopping, and we could see where they were in the purchase process. We served up questions to them at the time. IPS allows you to do that sort of thing as well. I mean, I think to Andy's point, that it's understanding the nature of the behavior, using the technology that we have in order to make changes. That's, I mean, when you think about it, it's a brand new set of knowledge and skills, though.
Yeah.
In order to do that, one that, generally speaking, the people, you know, the agent corporate researchers especially, don't quite have.
Yeah.
But what about the reverse? I mean, why not custom? Why can't we start somewhere, right? I mean, I get.
Well, I think we are.
Are we starting to see
are.
more in the custom area?
Yeah, the only reason I said that is because I see from our point of view that those trackers, I mean, that's where the load of the completes are, right? And you see now, like if you go to anybody's site who's got a web app, the web app, you see all the ratings, and they all say there's never any surveys, you know, or I got redirected to the full page website and stuff like that. I'm just, my perspective just based on, you know, an anecdote of three.
So we're gonna run out of time. We've only got literally a couple of minutes left. Jean.
About 15 months ago, what we decided to do is say, let's take a look at what the difference is. You know, we knew how many people were coming in on mobile, et cetera. But we wanted to stick with our same recruitment methods. But what we did, recruiting from the same sources and doing the same thing, we just asked people, what do you want your experience to be? Do you want your experience to be only mobile, or does it matter to you? And so for those who wanted just the mobile experience, we did everything through mobile. We sent text messages. We put the links that way for them to connect to the surveys, et cetera. Their whole engagement, their help desk, everything was through text messaging. And what we found is, between the differences, you know, and again, this is using the same exact recruitment sources. Our mobile-only panel was Hispanic, low-income, males, moms with kids, you know, all the ones that we were looking for really all the time. And we just let everybody else go to the regular panel. And then what we started working with internally with some of our, you know, as we're talking about the trackers, is talking to a few of the internal clients who were open to saying, okay, let's take out the best parts of our tracker and ask that on mobile. And that might only be 10 or 12 questions. And then see if we combine it with those PC only to see how that data looked. And surprisingly, and this took us about, you know, a while, 15 months, but the data quality did improve. And we did start to move towards that somewhat. The biggest thing came, as you were talking, JD, is it didn't permeate all the way through to upper management, because you know, it's so much easier to go out to the client and you already have that operational, build a survey, send it in, this is how we do it, and this is how we get our product out the door, and we get our $5,000, $10,000, $20,000. And it's much easier than having to really work towards the two sides. So what I see in helping is us internally having to help those people with the trackers build towards that to say the product's okay, and build that systemization and operationalize it to the point that it's no issue for our salespeople to go out there with that product. Because I see that being a really big problem. And then, taking away the trackers, which, at NPD, that's 99% of our business, right?
Well, I think Patrick was,
Yeah.
I joked that you're being disruptive, but I think that's we know the trackers aren't going to go away, and I think we're all working to try to, organizations are working, obviously.
I agree with Patrick. Do we know that they're going away?
Yeah.
Because there are lots of disruptive companies, to Don's point earlier, who are coming or are not at this conference, don't attend any MR conferences.
But in their current state.
Yeah.
So I think it's all in the definition, right? In the current state, we're not, whatever we decide, they're not sustainable. I mean, unless anybody disagrees.
And the other only point is that I have is, do we help along the way of what does a mobile survey, what kind of questions can a mobile survey answer versus combining it with social media and other aspects? And again, how do you make that into a product for our clients to make it easy to sell that in?
Yep.
Because until that happens internally, it's just going to be easier for our salespeople to go out and sell what they're selling. And you're not going to see it, to JD's point, until it's right in your lap, and then it's too late. So what is that combination to say, this is what you can answer on a mobile, this is what you can get from social media, this is what you can get from collecting receipts or anything else that you do, and here's how you answer all those questions. Because I find that the clients, like a Clorox, are very open.
Yeah.
Are very open
I
to say,
think
hey,
that's
we just
right.
want
I
our
think that's
questions
right.
answered. You help
Absolutely.
us, you're the researchers.
So this is just getting, I'm like, oh my God, why didn't we do 2 hours? This is exactly what we wanted, was to have all of this discussion, and we've just started it. So, we're together, for the next day and a half, and let's continue. There'll be lots of sessions, and let's continue to have this conversation. I think we had a call to action. We've talked about, shared responsibility and collaboration, the need for education, and the need to really, rethink, to coin the ARF's, terminology, the core business, and then, take advantage of the new products and the new business that's coming through, for mobile. So I want to just, give a huge thank you to our esteemed panelists, to Deb, Seema, Andy, and JD, and to all of you for your participation. So thank you.